On this episode of Supervision Simplified, we are celebrating and discussing everything that is about ching, ching, ching goes the money tree. And every time it chings, money comes to me in honor of our friend Libby. And we're talking about money, 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 and all of the things around supervision and money and what people charge for supervision and how much supervision costs. So join us today for our conversation about money and how much it costs and all the things having to do with the flow of money and supervision. Join us today for that conversation. We're loving to have you. Hello, and welcome back to Supervision Simplified. I am Dr. Amy Parks.
And I'm Valarie Harris.
Both of us are clinical supervisors. I am an LPC in Virginia.
And I am an LPC in Tennessee. Well, actually, technically an LPC MHSP. And I think it's the only one on all of the 50 states, right? That has that.
Yes.
We're extra.
In the 50 plus one states in the United States, there are 26 different letter titles for counselors throughout the United States in the counseling field. Yes, it's kind of an alphabet soup of different titles in the counseling field. I have no idea why. That's just, frankly, stupid.
Yes, agreed.
Sense. Why is that necessary? Completely unnecessary. It is not the way for social worker. Well, social workers is slightly, very, very slightly like that because there's some licensed clinical social workers and then like
licensed
MSW.
Masters.
Yeah, that's a little tiny bit confusing. And then I
think way less variation.
Way less variation. It's just why? Like why? Anyway, this is not the topic of today's podcast. However, today's podcast is all about the ka-ching of supervision. And that is about how much we charge for supervision, both inside our group practices, outside of our group practices, and how much it costs to have a supervisee in our practices. And so this topic we're having today, this conversation we're having today, is because this has been something that we've been talking about with some of our professional colleagues, because this is something that we're navigating in our practices, but it's also something that many of our colleagues have been navigating. We've been doing a survey. I surveyed 18 different practices in my region to find out what the average cost was to be paid to provide supervision. So I can give you that number for Northern Virginia. And then I also surveyed our clinical supervisors group, and our clinical supervisors group on Facebook has 2.4 thousand members. We did not get 2.4 thousand responses, but we got a number of responses. And so we'll tell you a little bit about those responses when we get them. But talk to us, Valarie, about sort of not necessarily about the cost or what you charge for supervision in your practice right now, but like talk about like how much it costs to bring on a supervisee.
I mean, it can cost quite a bit in terms of, time for sure. If you have another supervisor in your practice, like clinical supervisor, you're paying them to not only supervise that person, but you're often paying them to sign off on notes, which a lot of people don't think about. They, depending on the state, depending on the school and what the requirements are, if they're an intern, some schools require that the site supervisor be on site at all times. Some schools don't. Some states require that, someone licensed be on site for X amount of hours. So there's all these considerations that you have to make around your staffing, around availability, around even capacity. There are limits too to how many supervisees a supervisor can take, say, in group, and it still count as group supervision. Just like you can have a dyad and that can still be individual, but then once you add a third person, it's no longer individual, it's now a group. And so there's a lot to consider in terms of the true cost of your time and what an hour of your time is worth. And if the return on that investment is actually benefiting you, or is not benefiting. So, I mean, there's a way to do it, but you can't go into it lightly, I guess is what I would say. It really needs a lot of
Absolutely.
thought and intention, or else you could really get in over your head.
And let's be really clear. When you bring on a supervisee, you are bringing on essentially someone that you've never met. Hopefully you interview them. You better do that. You interview them, you reviewed their resume, but you're bringing on someone underneath your license who
Mm-hmm.
is going to function independently of you in a closed space with other human beings conducting mental health services. And they are, uh, you are liable for the work that they conduct. And so that is a huge responsibility. So there is nothing whatsoever to indicate that there is only 1 hour of work per
Oh
week
no,
as
no, not
part of that job. You and I both know that. And I think it's really funny when people think,
it is
and,
funny. Every
and
time
I
I
know that
travel,
you,
go out of town, I still have to make a contingency plan, a backup plan here, a second contingency plan. Yeah.
exactly. There is no 1 hour of supervision when you have a supervisee on your caseload. You are easily, um, you are easily doing more than 1 hour of work. And we're just talking about in private practice. We're not even talking about agency supervision, which is much, even oftentimes bigger, more work.
Mm-hmm.
Because in private practice supervision, I feel like I don't actually have to chase my supervisees. Excuse me. I don't really have to chase them much. I can, find them fairly easily, and they get their stuff done. But I have colleagues who work and do agency supervision, and the chasing them for their notes is really, really hard.
Wow. Yeah, I do know that I've had some people that worked at agencies before they came to us, and I know that the notes and the requirements of those notes were pretty intense. And I like to believe we're on par with our notes in the way they should be. And these were just extra and over the top and were one of their biggest stressors often.
Right. And if they weren't getting the notes on time, then the supervisor didn't get paid. But it wasn't the
Oh,
supervisor's responsibility to make sure the notes were getting done. Like the supervisees weren't getting the notes done. So
wow.
that's a big part of things. So let's be really clear to start that the time commitment of having a supervisee is, I mean, we know that there's a money part of this, but time is money.
That's right.
Absolutely 1000% time
And
is
and
money.
the two do not equate, just to be clear,
No,
like they are never you're not getting that same you're not getting monetary value back most of the time. Like
right.
it's monetary value plus something.
Right. We think a lot about trading our time for money, and you and I know both work really hard to not think that way. But in our field, there's a lot of trading time for money, and this is very much that. You are not. It's not a dollar for minute kind of thing. You are really
Right.
doing a lot more, and you're expected to be available to your supervisee for everything, and
And you
that's
need to enjoy it. Like I tell people, and you need to really have experience. I can't tell you how many times I've had a clinician who's like, thinks they can, once they're licensed, they can supervise. And I'm like, no, no,
oh
no, no, no. No, 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 no. You have to be licensed for X amount of years. You got to do all the, and they're like, oh, really? And I'm like, seriously? Um,
well,
so
don't
there's
speak too
that.
quickly though. Right, well, don't speak too quickly though, Valerie, because there are some states that the minute you're licensed, you can become a supervisor. So
Yeah,
be
well, it's
careful.
never been ours, so I'm just confused on where they got that. But either way, I think it's the other part of that I would just say as a cautionary tale is you really need to like mentoring people and coaching and
Yes.
watching people grow, educating. If someone is wanting to do supervision, kind of like I tell people, if you're wanting to do a teaching practice just for the revenue potential, don't do it. Please
Nah,
don't. Um,
forget it.
it is not just about that. It has to be more than that to you. Your why has to be more than that, or it's not going to be worthwhile. It
Yeah,
just won't.
no.
And it will, and the supervisee will feel it. It just, yeah. So I say that if you're somebody that doesn't like doing that, supervision is probably not your thing, and you can trade your time for in other ways.
in other ways. Absolutely. And that's totally okay. It's completely okay. But also, I think if you don't like learning and growing, then don't do it either.
Yeah.
So obviously, if you don't like mentoring, don't do it. And if you don't like continuing to learn and grow yourself, don't do it. Because
Right.
there's a lot that you need to continue to stay up on. And I, I don't, um, I am not in favor of people who feel like they can learn how to supervise once and never continue to grow and learn as leaders and mentors as we shift the narrative and shift our the way we work in this field. We have to continue to be open, and this idea we teach in our we the thing we do in counseling is talk about the beginner's mind. We
Yeah.
invite our clients to come in and say, okay, would you come with me into this idea of beginner's mind? Can you meet me there? But we don't do that as clinicians. Like, why?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So we have to. Why is that not the whole spectrum of how we do things? We have to do it that way. So we surveyed some people to see, and I think it's going to be fascinating to look at across the country. So what we really want to invite, I want a full idea of what people are charging across the country. So I know we don't have a good sense of that. So we really want to give a big shout out to our listeners and ask them, please comment
Mm-hmm.
on our posts as to what you charge, what you have been charged in the past for supervision. But let's start with internal company policies. So we don't need to speak specifically to our companies, but let's talk about what we know companies in general that we know of, what some companies do. So like I'm going to speak to what I know a couple companies that I'm familiar with do in terms of supervision as a benefit. And then you can sort of share what you know of some companies as well. So I know a few colleagues whose companies have supervision as a benefit who don't charge for supervision at all. So they have supervision completely as a benefit,
Mm-hmm.
meaning, and supervision is a benefit regardless of whether you charge or not. But supervision is free for their clinicians that work for them. And in fact, they pay their supervisees an hourly flat fee to attend supervision. I think that that's fabulous and lucky for them. I think that that's really terrific. And I think that they're in a really great gig, and I think that that's a great opportunity for those people to be a part of that. I don't know how the supervisors are paid in that particular arrangement, but I'm assuming they're obviously well compensated as well, so that's terrific. I think that that puts a lot of value to both the supervision and the supervisee, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that that arrangement works really well. I also know of another company where the supervisor is compensated and the supervisee pays a flat fee per supervision session, and it comes out of their regular gross pay.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't really necessarily see the fee. It just comes out of their gross pay. It is at a reduced rate than what they would pay in the community outside of the practice.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get their group hours, which are part of the practice's regular weekly clinical time in team meetings. They get that for free. So that's just kind of part of their culture that they're meeting on a regular basis, and that those group hours are free. In some states, you're allowed to have a certain number of group hours for free and a certain number
Mm-hmm.
or as part of your total. Some of them are individual. That's not true everywhere, but in some states that's true. So, then they are receiving their supervision at a reduced rate than they would get it outside of the practice. That seems to be a workable solution for some practices, and for this particular practice. So, what are you familiar with, Valerie?
I'm familiar with similar setups. I've also heard of some setups where let me see. So there's controversy, at least in my state, at times around like should a supervisee be paid to attend supervision? Who requires the supervision?
Mhm.
The state requires the supervision. So it's not necessarily the employer that is requiring it. Therefore, does the employer need to pay for the supervision and give the supervision? Um,
Right.
so, that
It's a
is,
requirement for your license.
huh?
It's a requirement for your license, and
Right,
your
it is.
job requires your license.
But does it? I
I
mean,
mean,
you could be, if you're a master's level clinician, like your master's, you're allowed to be hired, but you also have to be in supervision. Who is it on? I don't know.
well,
That's kind
right,
of the
right, right, right,
debate.
right. Yeah.
So we
I
are
would
not
think that
attorneys.
you,
We're not trying to play one. Talk to
no,
your attorney. Every check with your attorney and someone else's too, just to be sure. But I'm just giving light to that is something that gets talked about a lot. Um,
but I would think if
and
you're supposed to be, if your job responsibility is moving through this process towards this goal, then that was part of your hiring was to be in this role of licensee. I would think that it would be your responsibility to be moving towards that role. So it wouldn't be the practice's responsibility to make sure you got there. I don't know.
right.
It definitely could
Exactly.
fall
Like if you're going to
into
be qualified for the job, being qualified for that role is doing these things. So then
right,
is it a job duty or is it a qualification for the job?
right.
Yeah. So that's one. Another is
Our board would
agreement.
say we're not interpreting that.
No, 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 no. Another is agreements made where they will stay on for a particular time post licensure, and if they leave within that set time frame, that there is a like a buyout clause
Hmm.
or a fee for breaking that
Hmm.
agreement. So that's another one, and then a more recent one would be making a situation where sort of like you have a grad assistant in a grad school program, having someone who, I mean, you would have to know this person well or know it would have to work well for the practice and like the position, but essentially being able to put them in another seat in the company and have them exchange hour for hour in another role that maybe is something that will add value to them in their career, but it's serving the practice as well, and then it enables them to have supervision hour. If am I
I see.
explaining that right?
Yeah, so like you would have them as their intake person, for example, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Or like
Or they
you
might
might
help with a special project here
yeah,
or work on this over here in exchange for staying X amount of time after licensure or in exchange
right,
for paying as they go.
right, right. Has anybody ever had a non supervisor? Do universities allow people that aren't necessarily like credentialed supervisors supervise interns?
Yes.
Some do, right? Yeah.
We've had some that do. Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah. Because
Like the
I feel
site supervisor is not always the supervisor. So,
like
and
it's
then
not always
you,
a licensed supervisor because you don't need necessarily someone that's a licensed supervisor.
right.
You just need someone who's skilled at supervising.
Yes, correct.
I mean, I would think that you'd want them to be. And so that person, if you had someone supervising interns in your practice, you may want to compensate that person as well.
hmm
Um, in our
And
state,
some things I would say as far as from a monetary standpoint, things to consider. So as most of you all know, we had video sessions and video coding sessions. So reviewing tapes, looking at them. And one thing that you want to think about is if you have a clinician that you are also going to pay as a supervisor, you really need to look at the hours that will be spent doing all of those different tasks and make sure that you're really realistic about your expectations. So if they're signing off on notes, it may take you 30 minutes to sign off on somebody on an intern's notes for a week or something. But if you haven't been very clear about what you want them to look for, or maybe giving them some sort of guidance, that person could end up taking 4 hours just because they enjoy it. And now you're on the hook for paying for those 4 hours. So you really want to be clear. And I find that a lot of times practice owners aren't clear. They just assume that if that's the way they do it, or that it's certain, like you just assume you're just going to read the note and check it off. And unless you're clear, it can end up in a situation where you're paying someone a lot more than you budgeted because you weren't clear on what you need them to do and how it's supposed to look and what the time frames should look like for each task.
That's a really good point. So somebody asked in a group how to pay their supervisor, and I said my opinion was to pay them a flat fee per week rather than hourly, because I feel like you can really get into the weeds if you say hourly, because then you don't know how long it's going to take somebody, and you don't know how many things are going to come
Right.
up, and you don't know how much support the person is going to need. So when you say flat fee, then all of the things, and then you put in what that encompasses, emergency support
Mm-hmm.
and note reviewing and signing of notes, and your 1 hour of, of supervision, and whatever else is going to be included. Um,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely. You have to really make sure you consider all those things, because before you know it, that can tally up real
yeah,
quick.
and then you're broke. What
Mm-hmm.
So in Northern Virginia, which is obviously a different community than other places, so I'm really anxious to hear what other places, what's normal. It's interesting because when I was being supervised, again, like I say a lot, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, it was about $75 an hour. That was like the normal. So when I surveyed, and a colleague of mine surveyed 16 different practices in this area over the last 3 weeks, we got that the average was between 130, this is stunning to me, 130 and $200 an hour for supervision for grad students who are like poor as can be. I don't remember ever having that much money to pay for supervision. That is a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't even like paying my
jobs
therapist
didn't.
that much, and I like my therapist. But I mean,
I
I'm
think
not
there's,
saying we're not worth it.
yeah,
We're definitely worth it, but it is a lot.
but I do think there are some things to be said too
Good for us.
about even niche based
Yes.
supervision. So, I mean, as a trauma therapist, I do have people that will want to supervise with me or do some sort of consulting in addition to their supervision that they're getting somewhere else. And it's because they want to focus on those more specialized areas. And so I do think that there is a value add there with that. Um, but those types of supervision encounters tend to be a little bit shorter
Mm-hmm.
too.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the ones that are going to get you all the way to licensure. They're more intended to add
Mm-hmm.
skills and be able to, better develop your own niche in a certain area. And I would imagine that would be the same for a supervisor of play therapist, or who just does couples work or something like that. So I wonder how much, if any, of the variation could have to do with those clinical supervisors having a niche.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I
Because it is hard to imagine $200 an hour for like all the hours that you
I
need.
know. I think it's kind of a kind of crazy. All right. So let me see if I can tell you what some other. Well, no. Tell me what Tennessee. Tell me what's sort of the average in Tennessee.
Um, I think, so I've seen for group supervision somewhere around like 45 per group, 125, 130. I've seen some do 75. I think if I'm being honest, I think newer clinical supervisors come out doing $50 and 75 and quickly go to the
Uh-huh.
125 mark once they see how much work is
Right.
involved. I think that they think, oh, I'm going to see a couple less clients and take on some supervisees, and this is going to be great. And next thing you know, they're like, this is more work than having more
Yeah.
clients. So it's important to make sure that it's equitable for them. Like otherwise, they're just going to get burned out, bitter, all the other things we talk
Yeah.
about when it comes to value and money and boundaries and limits.
So here's what we heard from a colleague in New York. The colleague said, for the vast majority of my supervision work, I charge nothing. It is a benefit of being employed as a
Wow.
postgraduate pre-licensed clinician. My state even reinforces that the supervisee does not pay for the supervision. As a practice owner, I do assign 10% of the supervised clinician's revenue as supervision compensation. For private supervision, which really is more like consultation, I charge the same as my clinical rate, which is $2.25 an hour. So I think that that's very interesting. That the
Mm-hmm.
state even reinforces that the supervisee does not pay for the supervision. So now I
Wow.
don't know exactly if this person is a social worker or an LPC. I didn't ask specifically for that information when I surveyed our colleagues, but that was one of them. Let me see if I can figure out how I can try to figure out where everybody is from. Let's see. This person, I don't know where they're from. I'm not going to be able to tell you what state everyone is from, but another colleague says it all depends if you are supervising a clinician for just their supervision hours or if you're supervising for a practice where that clinician works under your license and you have to sign off on notes, right? I charge more for private practice supervision where there is a higher risk and added work outside of that supervision hour, such as notes. You also need to consider if you're supervising as a W 2 or a
Mm-hmm.
1099. So interesting, I think this whole 1099 W-2 thing is so fraught. I don't understand why it's so confusing. It's
Yeah.
not confusing to me at all. It is
Not confusing to me at
it
all
is
either.
so black and white to me. It's just not even funny. But
And that's me as a P saying that. That's me with the P on the end and not the J going, no,
I'm
there are no other ways to
I
look at
am
this. It's
completely
that
clear.
clear.
That person cannot work on their own. They cannot be a contractor. I do not understand why
Nope.
you do not get that. And I can't tell you how many people I know that try to get around that rule, that try to figure out some way.
Absolutely. I just am not trying to play with the IRS. I don't know why anyone would. It makes no sense to me. That is the one place you don't want your name. I mean, well, I'm sure there's a lot of other ones, but that's definitely at the top of the
That was
list. Like,
probably
I don't want to be on
FBI.
their,
Yeah,
I don't want to be on their list. Yeah. All the 3-letter agencies, I don't want to be on your list, your bad list.
no,
Why take the chance? It is not worth the risk. I can't even
no.
fathom.
We should tell you the cautionary tale. I don't know if you know this, but we know this person. We'll talk about their name outside of the podcast, but we know a person whose practice was fined $180,000, $180,000 because they had a supervisee on their staff who was a contractor instead of a W 2, and they had them on their staff for like 5 years and or 4 years, 3.5 to 4 years or something like that before they became licensed, and they were not paying taxes on their income, and then
Yep.
they were discovered in being out of compliance with workplace policy, and they got a clawback from the IRS, and they had to
Yep.
pay all of that money back.
Oh, yeah. And they'll go all the way back to the beginning. Let's say they were, and I'm not a CPA, but I do know this, verify it with yours. Let's say you were compliant halfway through that tenure. So let's say it was 5 years, but they got the license at 3 years and still not compliant because it's a contractor. But either way, let's just say for that state, it would have been compliant. It doesn't matter. They'll still go back and do the entire
Yep.
time.
They don't care if it was in 1995. They don't care when it was.
No, and fun fact, because this is kind of fun and I can say this. So once upon a time, um, there was a client in a practice that was an IRS agent and shared some information that I happened to have. And the information that I thought was pretty helpful was that oftentimes people there've rarely been enough IRS agents, and so that's part of the problem. And most of the time the IRS is about 2 to 3 years behind in audits. So once people start a bad habit and they go 1 year and nothing happens, they think they're okay. 2 years, nothing happens, they think they're okay. 3 years. So, but what they don't know is the IRS is just that far behind. So by
Mm-hmm.
the time they usually catch up and audit, these people have been doing this for
Oh
several
yes,
years.
I can relate to
And
that.
so it just really blows the case up that much
Yep,
bigger.
I can relate to that. The IRS hasn't processed my S corporation application from 2 years ago. We just discovered
Oh yeah, it took me a year
today.
to get them to change the name. A year
We just discovered today I
to
haven't been
change
an
it.
S corporation for 2 years. Do you think I'm going to get
Oh
any
my
money back? I
goodness.
don't know. I'm really excited. Okay, here's Minnesota. You ready? When I've done
Mm-hmm.
outside supervision as opposed to supervisees at a practice, I charge $60 an hour for individual and 80 for a dyad. I think of it as giving back to the community and building the next generation of therapists. And I'm a BMFT, which is, I'm guessing, an MFT. I don't know what a BBHT is,
Oh, oh.
but a BMFT, I'm assuming, is a bachelor's in marriage and family therapy, but
No, I
major
was thinking basic
basic
marriage
marriage and
and
family.
family.
We'll have to look up Minnesota.
Never heard of that.
We'll have to look up Minnesota, but I don't know what a BBHT is. Somebody tell us what a BBHT.
Is that a behavioral health?
Yeah, maybe something,
No,
but
not
in
like a.
Minnesota. All right, here is Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, 150 to 250 in private practice, or if an agency is paying me. 250. Go girl. New Jersey, $100 an hour. South Carolina, 80 for each individual hour and 80 per 2 hour group. I do a $5 discount if they pay by cash or check because of the credit card fees.
Oh, oh, yeah,
Smart.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Okay.
smart.
You had me at the cash there for a minute. I was going to go,
Well, give a
but then you
receipt.
said check, and
I
I'm
mean,
like,
just give a
oh,
receipt. That's okay. That's cool.
no, I know, I know.
I'm
I
all about
just,
the cash.
sometimes them cash discounts make me wonder if they got two cash registers. That's all.
Oh,
But
no, right.
it didn't sound like that was the case. I was reading
Okay,
into
I'm
that.
not sure where this person is from. Let me see if I can find out real quick. Um, hmm. Nope. Don't know where this person is from, but lovely photo. $85 an hour for this particular person. I'm not sure. Here's a Tennessee colleague, 115. So those are some of the ones that we have. I'm going to keep asking, and we'd like to continue to find out. We'll see if we can find out some more from some other colleagues. But we'd like to ask our listeners to tell us what they're charging, because one of the things we want to also make sure people understand, and one of the reasons why we started the clinical supervision directory, one of the reasons why Educate and Elevate exists, is because we know that bringing on interns and supervising them and bringing on residents or associates and supervising them can be an additional revenue stream for your
Mm-hmm.
practice, not only as a supervisor, but as a way to add clients, of course, to your practice and build up and bring up future employees to your practice as well, bringing on colleagues for
Yeah.
you to train and um, bring into your culture of your practice. So it's an extremely
Mm-hmm.
valuable part of your revenue model for practice building. And so we really want to emphasize that, this is not just a conversation for the sake of just sort of comparing apples to apples to apples or apples to oranges to pears, but really sort of having an idea of where does this where does this revenue model fit into the overall business of therapy and mental health care, in an atmosphere where we're supposed to not be talking about money, we're supposed to not.
I know, right? Because profit is a
Right.
bad
We're not, we're
word,
not gonna we're not gonna
apparently.
gatekeep
But
this kind of information. It's important for us to be talking about it, and it's important for us to be saying that there's an enormous amount of value. The reason why we have this podcast is because supervision is an incredibly important skill for people to learn and get better at. And we're working hard to do that. And so if we're going to work our tails off to be good at what we're doing, you better bet that we're going to charge a high value to our work.
absolutely, because it's very value aligned for us in the way we do it anyway. Most of us are doing this. I know for myself, I do it. I love to teach. I love to mentor, but aside from that, their other options are to go to an agency, and I know what's going to happen there. So to me, it's a win-win because they can get a valuable experience. They can have greater capacity working in a group practice. They can have a greater culture oftentimes. Like they're less prone to burnout, and so it really is, it can be mutually beneficial, which is ethically fantastic, and very value aligned. And yet there's still a lot of misunderstanding around it all and
I
how
want
it
to
works.
100% shout out those supervisors that are working in agencies, because that's a lot of work.
Yeah,
It's
that is not
easy. And there's
easy.
a lot of
Whew.
work there too. And they need a lot of support from us as well. And so
They,
we want to hold hands with
yes.
them and really be very intentional about saying that we 100% support your work. And we know that you're not able to be in a position of saying, hey, I want to charge this or I want to charge that. But we
Right.
also know that you're working hard to grow and be intentional in your work as well. And so, we want to be very clear.
And we see your heart. Like that is incredibly
Yeah,
challenging, like to have the systemic barriers that many of them have, and to serve well in spite of those, and continuing to try. I mean, I have a friend who did that for years, and I mean, just very passionate and just does great work, and I would be like, why are you still there? You know what I mean?
yeah,
And so it is, we need people,
yeah,
there, and I am thankful for all those supervisors that are there, because that is not for the faint
yeah. We
of the
welcome
heart.
you into this community as well. So we absolutely want to have that conversation with you as well and talk about the value that maybe you aren't able to charge, but you're able to offer. And so, we certainly value you as well. So
And I want to say real quick too, one of the challenges that I hope that group practices like mine and maybe yours will make is, my hope is that we can create models, or we can do things in such a way that maybe at some point some of the agencies would be curious to learn from us, that we could have conversations and come to the table together as leaders, and go, how is this group practice having this much impact, or how are they doing this, and these clinicians aren't burning out, but we're not, maybe, because I always believe that it's, teamwork makes the dream work. We're all in the same field for a lot of the same reasons, and I just think that they could learn a lot from us, and we could probably learn some things from them. And it's my hope that at some point, as we have a lot of teaching practices and maybe they don't have as many coming to them, that at some point we could have conversations about those differences and how to innovate and do some things
yeah, I'd
differently.
really love to be able to figure out a way that we could also work better together to relieve the capacity load that is that of an agency in a way that is also value aligned with what we need to do to sustain the well being of everyone. Because
Right.
people still need
Right.
to pay their bills and they still need to be able to live in their communities and they still need to be able to function and take care of their families. And so I want to do that. I don't know the answer to it. I do know I
I don't
know where
either.
it resides. It resides with insurance companies. But the
Hmm.
answer is going to be with us because insurance companies aren't going to solve it for us. So to that end, there is a petition out to get for mental health practitioners to all work together around this. So maybe we should put a link to it in our show notes so people can look at it.
That would be a good
But
idea. We
anyway,
should.
that's a whole nother conversation. In fact, we should invite our friend Jess. She's a part of that. Jess Zimmerman.
Yes, that'd be awesome.
Yeah,
She
we'll
would
talk
love
about
that.
that. In the
Hmm.
meantime, though, we're going to wrap up this conversation about money. And thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Supervision Simplified. And next time, we'll talk about some probably more things around money and supervision and interns and all the good things. But remember, for now, the revolution starts here. We hope you'll subscribe to Supervision Simplified and that you'll share it with your friends and colleagues. We also want your comments, stories, and feedback so we can be sure to be talking about all the things that interest you the most. So until next time, keep on simplifying and elevating your supervision game. Have a great day.